Nuclear weapons have no military utility whatsoever, excepting only to deter one's opponent from their use, which means you should never, never, never initiate their use against a nuclear-equipped opponent. If you do, it's suicide. And that conclusion I came to very early. As I say, when I came in, I didn't know the difference between a nuclear weapon and a conventional weapon, but it didn't take me long to find out, a few months, and I came to that conclusion. The problem was how to implement the conclusion.
McNamara presented the Joint Chiefs of Staff with an appealing alternative. Soviet cities were no longer to be targeted. They were to strike only at Soviet military forces. This was known as No Cities Counterforce.
And if both sides did that, then the casualties in the unlikely and very undesirable prospect of a nuclear war would be less.
This
idea of a no-cities plan is striking only against military bases, rocket forces and submarines. It was simply an attempt to make nuclear war morally acceptable. It was an attempt to deceive oneself.
The Russians weren't the only skeptics. The head of the Strategic Air Command, General Power, was briefed on counterforce by one of McNamara's assistants.
General Power insisted that the only way to deal with these barbarians was to blow them all up. And I said, but who's going to win that? And he said, I would be satisfied if there were just 2 Americans left and 1 Russian. That would be, we would have won. And I said, well, there'd better be one of them a woman.
October 1962. Khrushchev, seeking to reduce American nuclear superiority, sent Soviet missiles into Cuba.
It was real. You know, this was no joke. They were moving mid-range missiles into Cuba, and I don't think there's any doubt about the fact they were moving. They may have had some there already. They certainly had the facilities to rapidly introduce them. That was tense.
Kennedy ordered a blockade and put his forces across the globe on the highest alert. B-52s loaded with hydrogen bombs were ready for war.
During the Cuban crisis, if the horn blew, we shook like the devil. I mean, we were scared. We say, we're on our way. So we simply ran to that airplane and fired up the ground carts to get power to the airplane and air to start the engine. And we cranked those engines as fast as we could, and we would listen for a message from Strategic Air Command to give us instructions on what type of exercise it was, if it was a practice or if it was a real thing. You know, you literally swallowed because you didn't know what it was going to be.
Confronted by Kennedy's nuclear superiority, Khrushchev turned the missile ships back.
Both Khrushchev's government and Kennedy's government proved to be wise enough to find their way out of this situation. The Cuban Missile Crisis was very important. It showed just how close to the edge of the nuclear precipice the world was standing.
Moscow and Washington realized that direct communication between the two capitals must be improved. They installed the hotline between them. The following summer, shocked at how close they'd come to nuclear war, the Soviet Union, America and Britain agreed a limited test ban treaty. There would be no more atmospheric tests. Nuclear testing would continue, but underground. In Russia, the Kremlin had learnt a lesson. Never again did it want to confront America from a position of weakness.
Недостаток ядерного вооружения и слабость Советского Союза.
Lack of nuclear armaments and the weakness of the Soviet Union came as a shock to the Soviet leadership. It was like a cold shower for the government, who realized that these weaknesses had to be overcome.
The Soviet Union built up their nuclear forces. They added hundreds of missiles to their arsenal. The Americans had to accept that, realistically, they could no longer destroy all the Soviet forces.
It became clear that if you said that your main approach was going to be to target the other side's military capability, what would happen is that those targets would proliferate to the point where there would be no limit to the amount that you would spend on strategic forces. The military on both sides accepted that they could no longer protect their own country from destruction.
The superpowers had discovered they had one thing in common: an interest in avoiding nuclear war.
It is an ironic but accurate fact that the two strongest powers are the two in the most danger of devastation. All we have built, all we have worked for, would be destroyed in the first 24 hours. And even in the Cold War, which brings burdens and dangers to so many countries, including this nation's closest allies, our two countries bear the heaviest burdens. For we are both devoting massive sums of money to weapons that could be better devoted to combat ignorance, poverty, and disease.
A grim logic was beginning to emerge. Nuclear disarmament was not achievable, yet nuclear war was unthinkable. By 1964, McNamara had concluded that his No Cities plan was a dangerous illusion. War would only be avoided, he now thought, by the threat of mutual suicide.
McNamara, in particular, became totally convinced that the only strategy was what is known as mutually assured destruction, MAD for short. And what that meant was that the only way to have stable deterrence in the world was for both sides to be able to kill 25 to 50% of the other's population.
It's not MAD. Mutual assured destruction is the foundation of deterrence. Today, it's a derogative term. But it's those who denigrate it don't understand deterrence. If you want a stable nuclear world, if that isn't an oxymoron, let me rephrase it, to the degree one can achieve a stable nuclear world, it requires that each side be confident that it can deter the other. And that requires that there be a balance. And the balance is the understanding that if either side initiates the use of nuclear weapons, the other side will respond with sufficient power to inflict unacceptable damage.
Submarines now played a crucial role.
T0. Fire.
For MAD to succeed, each side needed to be able to retaliate even after it had suffered a surprise attack.
The Polaris system to begin with was really a city killer. It was extremely survivable, assured destruction capability that the Soviets knew they could not destroy, and knew that if they conducted a first strike, that system would someday be available to retaliate. It might take some time to get the message to them from a destroyed national headquarters, but at someday the warheads would come raining in, and they would pay the price. I don't think there would be any hesitation on the part of any commanding officer to launch. Did we think about what was back home? Sure we did. But you didn't let that control your actions. Time to think about that after you've done your duty.
The fact that very tense people were close to nuclear weapons, ready to use those weapons, presented a huge danger to the world. And of course we felt uncomfortable, but we still had to accomplish our task, like the Americans had to accomplish theirs, and we would have accomplished it. What would it have ended in? It would have had very sad consequences for the world.
I thought from the beginning it was morally bankrupt, decrepit, morally I just do not accept war, that the primary objective of the war is to kill people. Primary objective of war is to win the bloody thing with as few losses to, first of all, to your own side, and second to the other side. Always you want to minimize losses on both sides, but first of all yourself. But you want to win the thing and get it over as soon as possible.
If the first day had involved attacks on cities, then it would have been just unbelievably catastrophic. Tens of millions of deaths and enormous destruction.